Gang members surrounded Arnold Schwarzenegger at the park, unaware he was the governor of California. The morning mist still clung to the edges of Riverside Park as the first rays of sunlight broke through the canopy of oak trees. The air carried the crisp scent of dew-soaked grass mixed with the distant aroma of fresh coffee from a nearby vendor's cart. Joggers traced their usual paths along the winding trails, while elderly couples claimed their favorite benches for morning conversations. Children's voices echoed from the playground, where swings creaked rhythmically and slides gleamed with moisture. It was the kind of peaceful Saturday morning that made people forget about their troubles, at least for a few hours. Near the southern edge of the park, partially hidden by the shade of an enormous willow tree, a solitary figure occupied a weathered wooden bench. The man wore a faded gray hoodie pulled up over his head, loose-fitting workout pants, and scuffed running shoes that, his massive frame seemed almost compressed, shoulders hunched forward as if trying to minimize his presence. In his hands, he held a simple paper cup of coffee, steam rising lazily into the cool morning air. Beside him on the bench sat a worn gym bag, its zipper partially open to reveal a towel and what appeared to be boxing wraps. The man's face remained mostly hidden beneath the shadow of his hood, revealing only a strong jawline covered in gray stubble and the hint of weathered skin that spoke of years spent under harsh lights and harsher scrutiny. His hands, wrapped around the coffee cup, were enormous, scarred across the knuckles, with veins that stood out like cables beneath the skin. To any casual observer, he might have been a retired construction worker, perhaps a former athlete past his prime, someone seeking a moment of quiet before the day's demands began. The tranquility shattered like glass when the roar of engines tore through the morning peace. 6 motorcycles burst onto the park's main pathway, their exhausts modified to produce maximum noise, the sound echoing off the surrounding buildings like thunder. The riders wore matching black leather vests adorned with a crimson skull insignia, their faces hidden behind dark helmets with tinted visors. They rode in formation, deliberately swerving close to joggers who had to leap aside, their aggressive presence transforming the peaceful park into something that felt dangerous, territorial. The lead motorcycle, a massive chopper with chrome gleaming in the morning sun, pulled to a stop near the willow tree. The rider killed the engine and removed his helmet, revealing a face that seemed carved from granite and bad decisions. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with a shaved head covered in tattoos that crawled up his neck like dark vines. His arms, thick as tree trunks, displayed crude prison ink, teardrops beneath one eye, a spider web on his elbow, the numbers 188. A thick beard, streaked with gray, couldn't hide the sneer that seemed permanently etched into his features. The other riders dismounted in synchronized movements, forming a loose semicircle around the area. One of them, a younger man with wild eyes and a scar running from his eyebrow to his cheek, kicked over a trash can, sending garbage spilling across the pristine pathway. Another, rail-thin with arms covered in track marks, barely hidden by faded tattoos, pulled out a cigarette and lit it, despite the prominent no-smoking signs posted throughout the park. The message was clear, deliberate. We don't follow your rules, we make our own. The leader, who his crew called Reaper, surveyed the park with the cold calculation of a predator selecting prey. His eyes, pale blue and utterly devoid of warmth, scanned past the fleeing joggers, the mothers hurriedly gathering their children, the elderly couples who suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. Then his gaze locked on to the solitary figure on the bench beneath the willow tree. The man who hadn't moved, hadn't looked up, hadn't acknowledged their arrival at all. This indifference, this apparent disregard for their presence, ignited something dark and familiar in Reaper's chest. He had built his reputation on fear, on the ability to make people submit with nothing more than a look. This old man in his cheap hoodie, sipping coffee like he didn't have a care in the world, represented a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Not in front of his crew, not in what he considered his territory. Reaper's boots crunched on gravel as he approached the bench, his crew following like wolves trailing their alpha. The scarred younger man called Slash for reasons that became obvious when you looked closely at his hands, cracked his knuckles loudly. The thin one, known as Needle, flicked his cigarette ash deliberately onto the clean pathway. A third member, massive and silent, simply loomed, his presence designed to intimidate through sheer physical mass. The man on the bench took another slow sip of his coffee. His posture remained relaxed, almost meditative, as if he were completely alone in the park rather than surrounded by 6 dangerous men. This only fueled Reaper's anger, that familiar rage that had landed him in prison twice and put 3 men in the hospital over the years. "Hey," Reaper's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Old man, you deaf or just stupid?" No response. The man's hand, steady as stone, raised the coffee cup to his lips again. Through the gap in his hood, you could see just the hint of his profile. A strong nose, that distinctive jawline, but his eyes remained hidden in shadow. A woman pushing a stroller on a nearby path stopped, her maternal instincts warring with her fear. She pulled out her phone, fingers trembling as she tried to decide whether to call the police or simply run. An elderly man walking his dog paused behind a tree, his weathered face creased with concern, but his feet rooted in place by decades of learned helplessness. A teenage boy on a skateboard rolled to a stop at a safe distance, his phone already out, recording, because that's what his generation did. They documented everything, even their own cowardice. Slash stepped forward, emboldened by Reaper's obvious anger. "Boss is talking to you, Grandpa. You got wax in your ears?" He reached out and flicked the man's hood, a gesture designed to humiliate, to provoke. "Maybe you need a hearing aid, or maybe you need us to teach you some respect." The man's hand moved with surprising speed, catching Slash's wrist mid-reach. The grip was iron, unbreakable, and for a moment, Slash's cocky expression flickered into something that looked like pain. Then the man released him, his hand returning to his coffee cup as if nothing had happened. But everyone had seen it, the speed, the strength, the absolute control. Slash stumbled backward, cradling his wrist, his face flushing with embarrassment and rage. "You're dead," he hissed. "You're so dead, old man." Reaper's eyes narrowed. Something about that movement, that casual display of strength, triggered a warning bell in the back of his mind. But pride and reputation are powerful drugs, and he had consumed them for too long to listen to instinct now. "You just made a big mistake," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Nobody touches my crew. Nobody disrespects us in our park." The man finally looked up, just slightly, and for the first time, a sliver of his face became visible in the morning light. Strong features, weathered but somehow ageless. Eyes that held a calm certainty, an absolute lack of fear that seemed almost supernatural given the circumstances. And that accent, thick and unmistakable, when he finally spoke, "Your park?" The words rolled out with that distinctive Austrian inflection, each syllable precisely articulated. "I was not aware that public property had been privatized. Perhaps you should check with the city council about that." The accent caused a ripple through the small crowd of onlookers. The woman with the stroller's eyes widened. The elderly man behind the tree leaned forward, squinting. The teenager's phone camera zoomed in, trying to capture the face still mostly hidden by the hood. Whispers began to spread like wildfire through dry grass. But Reaper and his crew, focused entirely on their target, missed these reactions. Needle stepped forward, flicking his cigarette at the man's feet. "Funny guy. You think you're funny?" He pulled a switchblade from his pocket, the blade snapping open with a sharp click. "Let's see how funny you are when I carve that smile off your face." the massive silent member of the crew, called Mountain for obvious reasons, moved to block any escape route. His shadow fell across the bench like a dark stain. Slash, still nursing his wrist, positioned himself on the other side. They had done this before. This choreographed intimidation, this practiced violence. They knew how it would end, with their victim begging, with money or valuables changing hands, with another story to tell in the bars they frequented. The man on the bench set down his coffee cup carefully on the bench beside him. The movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial, like a warrior preparing for battle. He reached up and slowly pushed back his hood, revealing his face fully for the first time. The morning sun illuminated features that had graced movie screens for decades, that had appeared on campaign posters across California, that were instantly recognizable to anyone who had lived in the state for the past several years. Strong, chiseled features that seemed carved from granite. Piercing blue eyes that had stared down movie villains and political opponents with equal intensity. That unmistakable jawline that had become iconic, that had been parodied and celebrated in equal measure. Hair, gray now, but still thick, styled in that familiar way. This wasn't just some random old man in a park. This was Arnold Schwarzenegger. 7-time Mr. Olympia, Hollywood legend, and until recently, the governor of California. The recognition hit the crowd like an electric shock. The woman with the stroller gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. The elderly man behind the tree straightened up, his eyes wide with disbelief. The teenager's phone nearly slipped from his suddenly sweaty hands. Voices erupted in urgent whispers that grew louder by the second. "Oh my God, that's Arnold Schwarzenegger! Is that really him? That's the governor! Someone call the police! Keep recording! Keep recording!" But Reaper and his crew, their backs to the crowd, their attention fixed on their target, remained oblivious to the changing atmosphere. Reaper leaned down, bringing his face close to Arnold's, his breath reeking of alcohol and poor decisions. "I don't care if you think you're tough, old man. I don't care if you used to lift weights or whatever. Right now, you're in my world, and in my world, I'm God." Arnold's expression didn't change. His eyes, those famous eyes that had conveyed everything from robotic determination to comedic timing to political gravitas, simply assessed Reaper with the calm of someone who had faced far worse than street thugs. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent park, that accent making every word distinct and powerful. "I am going to give you one chance," Arnold said, quietly. "Take your friends, get on your motorcycles, and leave this park. Go home. Think about your life choices. And maybe, just maybe, you can avoid what is about to happen if you stay." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Slash laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Listen to this guy. He thinks he's still in the movies. Hey, Grandpa, this isn't Hollywood. There's no stunt coordinator here, no special effects. Just us and you're about to learn a very painful lesson." Needle waved his knife in a deliberately threatening manner. "Yeah, we're gonna teach you what happens when you disrespect the Reapers. Gonna make an example out of you so everyone in this park knows who runs things around here." Arnold stood up slowly, unfolding to his full height. Even in his late 50s, even dressed in casual workout clothes, his presence was commanding. His shoulders, still impossibly broad, seemed to fill the space beneath the willow tree. His chest, even beneath the loose hoodie, showed the outline of muscles that decades of disciplined training had maintained. His stance, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew combat, spoke of training that went far beyond movie choreography. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by morbid fascination and the hope of witnessing something extraordinary. The woman with the stroller had her phone out now, dialing frantically. The elderly man had emerged from behind his tree, standing straighter, as if Arnold's presence had somehow given him courage. The teenager's video was being live-streamed now, Viewers multiplying by the second as word spread across social media. And if you're watching this unfold, wondering how one man, even someone as legendary as Arnold Schwarzenegger, could possibly handle 6 dangerous gang members, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now, because what happens next is going to absolutely blow your mind. And trust me, you don't want to miss future stories like this. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and whether you've ever witnessed someone being completely underestimated like this. Reaper's hand shot out, grabbing the front of Arnold's hoodie, pulling him close. "Last chance, old man. Give us everything you got, or we're gonna—" He never finished the sentence. Arnold's hand moved with speed that seemed impossible for a man his age, his size. It clamped around Reaper's wrist with crushing force. And suddenly the gang leader's confident expression transformed into shock and pain. Arnold's grip was legendary in bodybuilding circles, developed through decades of holding hundreds of pounds of iron, and now it was being applied to human bone and sinew. "I gave you a chance," Arnold said, his voice still calm but now carrying an edge of steel. "You chose poorly." With seemingly effortless strength, Arnold twisted his arm, and Reaper found himself spun around, his own arm locked behind his back in a control hold that sent lightning bolts of pain through his shoulder. The gang leader, who had intimidated countless people with his size and reputation, was suddenly as helpless as a child in the grip of someone who understood leverage, pressure points, and the mechanical advantage of proper technique. Slash rushed forward with a wild haymaker, all rage and no technique. Arnold's response was textbook. He released Reaper with a push that sent the gang leader stumbling forward, then slipped Slash's punch with a minimal head movement that spoke of training far beyond what movie audiences had ever seen. His counter was a straight right hand, not thrown with full power, but with perfect technique, catching Slash square on the chin. The young gang member's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. Needle lunged with his knife, the blade aimed at Arnold's midsection in a wild, desperate stab. Arnold's hand shot out and caught Needle's wrist, stopping the attack cold. Then, with a twist that demonstrated knowledge of joint locks and pressure points, he bent Needle's wrist backward until the knife clattered to the ground. A follow-up palm strike to Needle's chest sent him flying backward, landing hard on the grass, gasping for air like a fish out of water. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, the sound washing over the scene like a wave. "Get them, Governor!" someone shouted. "Show them what real strength looks like," called another voice. Phones captured every moment from multiple angles. The footage already going viral as it was shared and reshared across social media platforms. Mountain, the massive silent member, finally moved. He charged like a bull, all 300 pounds of muscle and bad intentions aimed at Arnold like a freight train. Arnold didn't try to stop the charge head-on. That would have been foolish, regardless of his strength. Instead, he used Mountain's own momentum against him, stepping aside at the last moment and using a hip throw that would have made his judo instructors proud. Mountain's huge frame flew through the air and crashed into the bench, splintering the old wood with a sound like a gunshot. The remaining 2 gang members, who had been hanging back, suddenly found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. They scrambled for their motorcycles, engines roaring to life, abandoning their crew without a second thought. Cowards, Arnold thought, but he let them go. They would spread the word, and sometimes the story was more valuable than the capture. Reaper, recovering from his initial shock, pulled a chain from his vest. Thick, heavy, the kind used to secure motorcycles. He swung it in a wide arc, the metal whistling through the air with enough force to break bones. Arnold ducked under the first swing, stepped inside the second, and delivered a devastating body shot to Reaper's ribs. The sound of the impact was audible across the park, a deep, meaty thud that made several onlookers wince in sympathetic pain. Reaper doubled over, the chain falling from his nerveless fingers. Arnold grabbed him by the vest and lifted him off his feet. holding him at arm's length like a parent holding a misbehaving child. The gang leader's feet dangled uselessly, his face turning red as he struggled against a grip that might as well have been made of steel. "You wanted to know who I am?" Arnold said, his voice carrying to every corner of the park. "I am someone who came to this country with nothing, who built everything through discipline, hard work, and refusing to accept limitations, who learned that real strength is not about intimidating those weaker than you, but about protecting those who cannot protect themselves." He set Reaper down, but kept one hand on the gang leader's vest, holding him in place. "You and your friends, you think you are tough. You think violence and intimidation make you powerful. But look at you now, 6 against 1, and you are defeated, not because I am special, but because you are weak. Weak in character, weak in spirit, weak in every way that truly matters." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly closer. The woman with the stroller had gotten through, and now 3 patrol cars were screaming toward the park, their lights flashing red and blue through the morning mist. But Arnold wasn't finished. He released Reaper and addressed the crowd, his voice that of a leader, a governor, someone who had commanded attention in legislative chambers and on movie sets with equal authority. "All of you who are watching, I want you to remember something. Evil triumphs when good people do nothing. Today you called for help. You documented what happened. You stood witness. That is important. That is how communities protect themselves." The police cars screeched to a halt, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. But they quickly assessed the situation, the former governor standing calmly, the gang members scattered on the ground or sitting in defeated postures, the crowd of witnesses with their phones out. The senior officer, a sergeant with 25 years on the force, approached Arnold with a mixture of respect and disbelief. "Governor Schwarzenegger," the sergeant said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and genuine concern. "Are you all right, sir?" Arnold nodded, brushing off his hoodie. "I am fine, Sergeant, but these gentlemen are not. They attempted to rob me and threatened me with weapons. I defended myself. There are many witnesses." He gestured to the crowd, where dozens of people nodded eagerly, their phones still recording. The sergeant's expression hardened as he looked at the gang members. Assault on a former government official, armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon. You boys just won the stupid lottery. He barked orders to his officers, who began the process of arresting and securing the gang members. Reaper, his hands being cuffed behind his back, looked up at Arnold with something that might have been respect, or perhaps just the dawning realization of how badly he had miscalculated. You could have really hurt us," he said quietly. "You held back." Arnold met his gaze steadily. "Of course I held back. I am not a savage. I used only the force necessary to stop you, nothing more. That is what discipline means. That is what real strength looks like." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "You are young enough to change your path, but you must choose it. No one can force you to be better. That decision is yours alone." As the police led the gang members away, the crowd pressed closer, wanting to speak to Arnold, to thank him, to simply be near someone who had just demonstrated what real heroism looked like. The elderly man who had hidden behind the tree approached with tears in his eyes. "Governor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "they've been terrorizing this park for months. Nobody knew what to do. We were all so afraid. Thank you. Thank you for showing us that we don't have to be." Arnold clasped the old man's shoulder gently. "You do not have to thank me. You just have to remember. Fear is natural, but courage is a choice. Every single day, you can choose to be brave, to speak up, to stand up. That is how we build communities worth living in." A young mother approached, her child peeking shyly from behind her legs. "My son wants to say something," she said softly. The boy, no more than 6 years old, stepped forward with the fearless honesty of childhood. "Are you really the Terminator?" he asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Arnold smiled, that famous smile that had charmed audiences for decades. He knelt down to the boy's level, his massive frame somehow making itself smaller, less intimidating. "I played the Terminator in movies," he said gently. "But that was just pretend. What happened here today, this was real. And you know what the difference is?" The boy shook his head, completely captivated. "In movies, the hero always wins because the script says so. In real life, the hero wins because they train, because they prepare, because they refuse to give up. You can be a hero too, but not by being violent, by being kind, by being brave, by standing up for people who need help. Can you do that?" The boy nodded vigorously, and Arnold reached into his pocket, pulling out a small pin, the California state seal. "This is for you, to remember that real heroes do not need muscles or weapons. They just need courage and a good heart." The boy's face lit up like Christmas morning as Arnold pinned the seal to his shirt. His mother wiped tears from her eyes, mouthing "thank you" over her son's head. The sergeant approached Arnold again, a tablet in his hands. "Governor, we're going to need a statement, and probably about 100 witnesses are going to want to give theirs too." He glanced at the crowd, many of whom were still recording. "This is going to be all over the news within the hour." Arnold nodded, standing up from his crouch. "That is fine. Let it be on the news. Let people see what happens when bullies pick the wrong target. Let them see that age is just a number, that titles do not define strength, and that every person has the power to stand up for what is right." As Arnold walked with the sergeant toward the patrol cars to give his statement, the crowd parted before him like water. Many reached out to shake his hand, to pat his shoulder, to simply touch someone who had just become a living legend all over again. The teenager who had recorded everything was already watching his view count explode. The video being shared across every social media platform, news outlets already calling for permission to use the footage. The park, which had been filled with fear and tension just minutes ago, now buzzed with energy and hope. Families returned to their morning routines, but with a new sense of security. Joggers resumed their paths, but with their heads held a little higher. The elderly couples reclaimed their benches, but with stories to tell that would last for years. Arnold finished his statement, answered the sergeant's questions, and declined the offer of a police escort home. "I walked here this morning," he said simply. "I will walk home. This is my neighborhood too. I will not let fear change how I live my life." As he prepared to leave, collecting his gym bag from where it had fallen during the confrontation, a reporter from a local news station rushed up, microphone in hand, camera operator in tow. "Governor Schwarzenegger, can we get a statement? What do you want people to know about what happened here today?" Arnold paused, looking directly into the camera with those famous eyes that had conveyed so much over the years. "I want people to know that strength is not about muscles. It is not about intimidation. Real strength is about character, about standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult, about protecting those who cannot protect themselves." He gestured back toward the park, where life was returning to normal. These gang members, they thought they were strong because they could scare people. But they were weak in every way that matters. And when they faced someone who refused to be intimidated, who refused to be a victim, they crumbled. The reporter leaned in, sensing a profound moment. What would you say to other people who face intimidation, who feel powerless against bullies? Arnold's expression grew serious, intense. "I would say this: you are not powerless. You have more strength than you know, but you must choose to use it. Call the police. Stand together with your neighbors. Document what you see. Speak up. Do not let fear silence you. Because when good people do nothing, evil triumphs. But when good people stand together, evil has no chance." He paused, then added, "And to the bullies out there, the ones who think they can intimidate and threaten without consequences, I say this: you never know who you're dealing with. That quiet person you are targeting might be stronger than you imagine. That old man on the bench might have more fight in him than you can handle. That seemingly weak victim might be the one who brings your whole world crashing down." The reporter thanked him, and Arnold finally began his walk home, his gym bag over his shoulder, his hoodie pulled back up despite the warming morning. Behind him, the park continued its transformation back to normalcy, but it would never truly be the same. A line had been drawn, a message had been sent, and everyone who had witnessed it, everyone who would see the videos, everyone who would hear the story, would carry it with them. As Arnold walked through the streets of his neighborhood, people began to recognize him despite the hoodie. A construction worker on a break stood and applauded. A group of teenagers stopped their conversation to stare in awe. An elderly woman watering her garden called out, "You showed them, Governor! You showed them all!" Arnold waved, smiled, acknowledged them all, but kept walking. Because for him, this wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about a simple principle that had guided his entire life. When you see wrong, you make it right. When you see weakness being exploited, you protect the weak. When you see evil, you stand against it. He thought about the gang members, now sitting in police cells, facing serious charges. He hoped they would take the chance he had offered, the opportunity to change their paths. Some would, he knew. Some wouldn't. But the opportunity had been given, and that was all anyone could do. He thought about the little boy with the California state seal pinned to his shirt, about the lesson he had learned today. Not about violence, but about courage, about standing up, about being a hero in the ways that truly mattered. He thought about the community, about how they had responded, how they had documented and called for help and stood witness. That was the real victory, not his physical triumph over the gang members, but the community's refusal to simply accept intimidation as the price of living in their neighborhood. As he reached his home, a modest house that had always seemed too small for his larger-than-life presence, Arnold paused at the door. He looked back toward the park, invisible now behind buildings and trees, but still present in his mind. He thought about the morning that had started so peacefully, with just a man and his coffee, and a moment of quiet reflection. Life had a way of presenting challenges when you least expected them, but that was okay. That was how you knew you were alive, how you knew you still mattered, how you knew you could still make a difference. Age was just a number. Titles were just words. What mattered was character, courage, and the willingness to act when action was needed. Arnold entered his home, finally allowing himself to feel the slight ache in his knuckles, the minor strain in his shoulder from that throw. He wasn't 20 anymore, wasn't even 40, but he was still strong enough to protect himself, still capable enough to defend others, still vital enough to make a difference. And that, he thought as he set down his gym bag and finally finished the coffee that had somehow survived the confrontation, was all that really mattered. Not the fame, not the fortune, not the titles or the accolades. Just the simple knowledge that when the moment came, when someone needed help, when evil showed its face, he had been ready. He had been capable. He had been enough. The story would spread far beyond that park, beyond Sacramento, beyond California. It would become a reminder that heroes weren't just in movies, that strength wasn't just physical, that courage could be found in the most unexpected places. And somewhere, in parks and streets and communities across the country, people would remember the lesson. Never judge a book by its cover. Never assume silence means weakness. Never mistake kindness for vulnerability, because sometimes the quiet person on the bench, the one minding their own business, the one who seems like an easy target, is actually the strongest person there. And when they stand up, when they reveal who they truly are, the bullies discover too late that they've made a terrible, terrible mistake. Respect isn't taken by force. It's earned through action, through character, through the choice to be better than the worst impulses of human nature. And sometimes, the universe puts the right person in the right place at the right time to teach that lesson in a way no one will ever forget.